We tend to measure great empires by their might, their conquests, and the fire of their legions. The Draconian Empire was no different. For 1,000 years, it had been ruled by a dynasty of awesome dragons whose power was absolute and whose lineage was forged in celestial fire. But the strength of a dynasty isn't measured in its past, but in its future. And the future of the mightiest empire in the galaxy rested on the trembling shoulders of a single, broken child. This is the story of how a millennium of draconic pride failed, and how the empire was saved not by a warrior or a mage, but by a humble human nurse with a radical, unheard-of idea. At the heart of the Dragon Empire, Emperor Draxos had power that could shatter mountains. His throne was carved from a fallen star, and his voice was the thunder that rolled before a storm. And yet, all that power meant nothing when it came to stopping the pained whimpers of his only heir. The little hatchling, born small and with a withered wing, had been declared a lost cause by every dragonmancer and brood warden in the land. They tried it, ancient spells, molten gold remedies, roars of dominance, but the future of the dynasty only grew weaker. In a final, desperate move that flew in the face of 1,000 years of draconic pride, the emperor issued a decree that shocked the empire. He would entrust the royal hatchling to a creature they'd long dismissed as fragile and insignificant. He summoned a human nurse, whose only credential was a quiet, radical idea that every dragon thought was absurd. The imperial hatchery, once a place of hope, had fallen silent. This was where Prince Ignis, sole heir to the throne, was trapped in a half-life of torment. He was a fraction of the size a royal hatchling should be, his scales a dull bronze instead of his father's brilliant gold. His left wing was a shriveled, useless thing, and his attempts to breathe fire came out as pathetic puffs of grey smoke. He trembled constantly, his huge, terrified eyes darting at every shadow. He refused to eat, recoiled from every touch, and his cries were thin, weak sounds that grated on the soul of an empire built on strength. Emperor Draxos had summoned every expert. First came the Grand Dragonmancer, who chanted spells of power to try and magically fix the wing. The air crackled with energy, but the hatchling only shrieked in terror, convulsing from the volatile magic. The Dragonmancer failed, declaring the prince's spirit too broken to hold the fire of his ancestors. Next came the Imperial Broodwarden, a colossal matron who believed the hatchling needed a shock to his system. She roared, expecting him to roar back. She shoved raw meat at him, expecting a predator to emerge. But Ignis just cowered, starving himself rather than face the terrifying displays of power. After a week, the Broodwarden bowed her head. "There is no dragon in him," she rumbled. "A death sentence. Only fear." The last try came from a legendary battlemaster. He believed all weakness was a matter of discipline. He devised brutal training regimes, trying to force Ignis to fly. He'd drop the prince from a short height onto silk mats, a common way to trigger flight instinct. Ignis would just fall, a limp, pathetic bundle, letting out a cry so full of despair that even the guards flinched. The prince's condition only got worse. With every failure, the whispers in the court grew louder. Draxus's rivals began to circle. An empire whose ruler couldn't produce a viable heir was an empire ripe for the taking. Draxos, the conqueror of star systems, would stand at the hatchery doors and listen to the weak cries of his son. He, who had never known helplessness, was now its prisoner. It was in that moment of despair that his gaze fell upon the human delegation, and he made the decision that would change everything. The summons came as a complete shock. Ilara was a pediatric nurse at the small human embassy, a quiet post that mostly involved treating diplomats' kids for spec. She was unassuming, with calm hands and wise eyes. She'd taken this job on the frontier, to escape a past filled with the noise and grief of a children's hospice back on Earth. There, she had learned a profound lesson. The most fragile lives need the gentlest touch. She had held hands too small to wrap around her finger and seen more courage in those tiny chests than in any soldier. When she stood before the emperor, the court practically bristled. The audacity of a soft-skinned, wingless creature being presented as a solution was a deep insult. Ilara stood in the shadow of the colossal emperor, whose golden eyes burned with an intensity that could melt steel. "The greatest minds of my empire have failed," he rumbled, his voice laced with a desperation he couldn't quite hide. "They say he is a lost cause. You humans are known for your inventiveness, born from your own frailty. What is this brilliant, unheard-of idea of yours?" Ilara looked past the emperor toward the hatchery doors, from which she could just hear a faint, distressed whimper. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice steady and clear, "with all due respect to your experts, you've been trying to fix a dragon. What if you started by trying to comfort a baby?" A low growl rippled through the court. The Broodwarden scoffed. "He is the heir to the empire, not a human infant. He needs fire, not coddling." Ilara met her gaze without flinching. "Everything needs comfort when it's scared," she said simply. "You've been treating his condition like a character flaw. I see it as a symptom of pain. You've commanded him, trained him, and tried to magically reshape him. Has anyone tried to listen to him?" She turned back to the emperor. "My brilliant idea isn't some secret spell. It's rhythm, it's warmth, it's quiet. I won't promise to make him a warrior. I will promise to make him feel safe. And only from safety can true strength ever grow." There was a long, heavy silence. Draxos studied this tiny creature offering a philosophy so alien to his very being, strength from safety. It was absurd, but it was also the one thing he hadn't tried. Do it, he commanded. But know this, human, if you fail, my disappointment will be the last thing you ever experience. When Alara entered the hatchery, the change from the Grand Palace was jarring. This room wasn't a nursery. It was a fortress built to contain a threat. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and fear. The temperature was sweltering, set for a fire-breathing adult, not a fragile baby. And in the middle of it all, Ignis trembled. Her first act was to dismiss the hissing draconic attendants. He's overstimulated, she stated calmly. Too much noise, too much fear. Her second act was to fix the room itself. She ordered the searing braziers cooled to a gentle warmth. She had the scorched silks and broken training tools removed, replacing them with soft bedding woven from moonfeet. The prison of expectation slowly started to feel like a nursery then. She approached the hatchling. She didn't walk. She knelt, making herself small. She didn't speak in commanding draconic. She hummed. It was a simple, low lullaby she'd once used for premature human babies who were too fragile to be held. It was a sound that meant safety, a rhythm that was predictable and calm. Ignis, who had only ever known roars and commands, fell silent. His trembling lessened. One of his large, golden eyes, no longer clouded by sheer terror, fixed on her. He just watched, his head cocked with a spark of curiosity. Alara didn't try to feed him the raw meat the brood warden insisted on. She brought in a bowl of warm, nutrient broth. She placed it a respectful distance away and then just sat, humming her quiet tune. Hours passed. Alara simply sat there, breathing slowly. In, out. You're safe now. Finally, driven by a hunger no longer choked by fear, Ignis took a hesitant step. He skittered to the bowl, lapped at the broth, and immediately scurried back. But he had eaten. It was a bigger victory than any battle the Empire had ever won. Next, she addressed the withered wing. She never touched it at first. She simply laid a soft cloth, soaked in a warm herbal solution near him. She noticed he always tried to hide the limb, a clear gesture of shame. So, she ignored it. One day, as she hummed, Ignis slowly stretched his good wing. Then, looking right at her, he gently brushed his withered wing against the warm, soothing cloth. It was a silent question, a flicker of trust. This was Ilara's idea. Not a single trick, but a total reversal of draconic thinking. While they demanded strength, she nurtured vulnerability. While they tried to force his fire, she soothed his fear. She didn't see a failed prince. She saw a child in chronic pain, overwhelmed by a world that was too loud, too hot, and too demanding. The first time he made a sound that wasn't a cry of pain, a low, soft purr that rumbled in his chest as she hummed. Ella knew she was on the right path. Emperor Draxos watched all of this through scrying crystals, his skepticism warring with disbelief. He saw his son eating. He saw him resting without trembling. But he also saw an abomination. His heir, the future ruler of the galaxy, was being treated like a pet. He was being comforted, not commanded. He was bonding with a human. His generals were furious. She is making him weak. The battlemaster roared, the heir to the throne, purring like a house cat for a mammal. You must execute her, your majesty, and end this farce. The pressure was mounting. Draxos stormed into the hatchery, his presence shaking the very walls, his eyes burning with rage. What have you done to him? He thundered. Ignis, who had been resting peacefully near Alara, immediately seized up, that old terror flooding back. A weak, pained whimper escaped him. Alara stood slowly, placing herself between the Emperor and the hatchling. She didn't bow. I've done what you asked, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I am making him well. You are making him a pet. Draxos bellowed. He is a dragon. He should be breathing fire, not purring for a nurse. And what good is an emperor who is broken by his own fear? Alara shot back, her voice rising with passion. You see a throne, a symbol. I see a child born into a world that has caused him nothing but pain. His wing isn't the source of his weakness, your majesty. It's the source of his agony. His inability to breathe fire isn't a flaw in his spirit. It's a body so seized by stress it can't function. You have all been punishing him for his disability. She took a breath, her voice softening. On my world, I cared for babies born too soon. We didn't roar at them to breathe. We didn't command their lungs to work. We made a space for them, warm, quiet, safe. We nurtured them so they could find their own fight. Your son is no different. He isn't weak. He is exhausted from being in a constant state of defense. Draxos was stunned by her audacity. He looked from the defiant human to his son, now peeking out from behind her, his terrified eyes fixed on his father. For the first time, Draxos didn't see a flawed heir. He saw the terror he himself had caused. He does not need training, Alara whispered. He needs comfort. Just then, a guard burst into the room. Your Majesty, Lord Vorlag's fleet is at the edge of the system. He has broken the truce. He is challenging your right to rule. Drax's head snapped up. Vorlag was his most dangerous rival, a dragon who believed only in strength. He'd heard the rumors. He was here to exploit the weakness and claim the throne. The test was here. The attack was swift and brutal. Lord Vorlag's forces went straight for the palace, their target clear the air. Vorlag knew if he could show the Empire the weak, pathetic hatchling, Draxus's rule would crumble. Alarms bled. Draxos roared commands to his legions. Guard him with your life, human. He ordered Alara take him to the inner sanctum, but as guards rushed in, a squad of Vorlag's elite assassins blasted their way into the hatchery. They were massive, brutal dragons, their eyes burning with contempt as they saw the small prince. One lunge not at Ignis but at Elara. In that instant, something shifted. Ignis saw the creature that had given him warmth and safety about to be destroyed. The one being in the universe who hadn't judged him was about to die. And a feeling he had never known, not fear, but a searing, protective rage erupted inside him. It wasn't a roar that came out. It was a shriek of pure fury, and with it came a torrent of brilliant, golden fire. It wasn't the controlled inferno of an adult dragon. It was a wild, chaotic, and magnificent blast of raw power. It slammed into the assassin, who recoiled in shock, his scales smoking. The other assassins froze. Alara stared, her heart pounding. The small, broken hatchling now stood over her, his chest puffed out, his good wings spread wide, a plume of golden smoke curling from his nostrils. His withered wing pulsed with a faint, golden light, as if the fire inside him was reawakening its very veins. He was still small. He was still disabled. But for the first time, he looked like a prince. Just then, Emperor Draxos burst back into the room. He froze. He saw the scorched assassin, the stunned intruders, and his son, standing defiant, breathing fire to protect his human nurse. He saw that the strength he had tried to force had finally been unlocked not by fear, but by love. A deep, rumbling sound started in Draxus's chest. Not anger, pride. He let out a roar that wasn't a command, but a celebration, a challenge to anyone who dared harm his son. He unleashed his own fire, incinerating the remaining assassins, but he then landed softly before Ignis. He didn't tower over him. For the first time, he crouched, lowering himself to his son's level. Ignis didn't cower. He stood his ground. Draxos looked from his son to Alara, his gaze filled with a reverence no one had ever seen. You were right, human, he rumbled, his voice thick with emotion. His strength was there all along, buried beneath his pain. He looked back at his son who had nudged his head against Alara's arm. He is not only my son, Draxos declared. He is the storm that will unmake kingdoms. And you have taught him how to rage. In the wake of the failed coup, the story of the human nurse and the dragon prince spread like wildfire. It was a story that began to reshape an empire, teaching a species built on power that true strength isn't the absence of weakness, but what you do with it. It showed them that empathy isn't a flaw, but a key that can unlock something incredible. If this story of connection and courage touched your heart, please consider liking and subscribing for more tales from across the universe. Let us know in the comments, what do you think the true meaning of strength is? The Draconian Empire entered a new age. Emperor Draxos, with his heir growing stronger every day, began to rule not just with power, but with wisdom. Alara was given the highest honor in the empire, a title created just for her, Imperial Heartkeeper. She remained by Ignis's side, his most trusted advisor and friend, helping the young prince balance the fire in his soul with the compassion in his heart. The withered wing never fully healed, but it no longer mattered. It became a symbol not of shame, but of survival, a reminder that the deepest wounds often forge the strongest spirits. Because sometimes, the greatest power isn't in the roar, but in the quiet whisper that says, "You are safe with me."